Welcome to our first online session. This is going to be a practice video. Basically, what I'm going to be doing is walking through a problem for taxation and moving on throughout the semester. Once a week, my goal is to post a practice video for the material that we're learning in class. Again, I know sometimes it gets a little confusing just trying to do it on your own, so hopefully this helps. I'm going to do a step-by-step. We're going to do consumer surplus, producer surplus, deadweight loss, what happens with the tax. And the worksheet that you have that's due this week is also going to be, it's going to resemble this worksheet or this practice problem. So if you follow along this, you should be fine for the worksheet. Again, for the worksheet, just try your best. That's all I ask. So we're going to get started. Here I have a little setup. So these are the numbers that are given to you. We have our price, our quantity. For now, we're not going to talk about what market we're looking at. We have our supply or demand, and I give you these numbers. So on your exam, which is going to be multiple choice online, you're going to be given a table or a graph, and you should be able to calculate what I'm asking you for. So here, our equilibrium price is 10. Our equilibrium quantity is 20. So from here, you should already be able to visualize consumer and producer surplus, and from there be able to calculate it. So we're going to first start by calculating consumer surplus. Consumer surplus, again, is the area beneath the demand curve above the price. Our price here is 10. 10 is our equilibrium price. Our demand curve is located here. That's why it's important to label your curve. So the area of consumer surplus is this shaded area right here. So if you would like, you can pause the video, calculate before I do. So you're going to find the difference between 10 and 20, and then multiply it by the base, which is 20, and then you're going to divide by 2. Again, the area of a triangle is base times height divided by 2. So if we plug in all the numbers that we have, so 20 minus 10, that's this area right here. So this length times this length. And you're going to divide by 2. What you should get is 100. So your consumer surplus is 100. That's the area of this triangle. Now again, we haven't implemented any tax yet. We will in a bit. For now, we just calculate consumer surplus. All right, so now we're going to calculate producer surplus. So producer surplus is the area above the supply curve beneath the price. So it's this triangle right here. Again, our equilibrium price is 10. Our supply curve is already labeled. So this area right here, this is your producer surplus. This area is your consumer surplus. So again, we're going to use the same formula, base times height divided by 2. So the difference between 0 and 10, which is 10, multiply by 20. You divide by 2. That should also give you 100. So now that we have producer surplus and consumer surplus, again, our consumer surplus was 100. The formula for total surplus is just consumer surplus plus producer surplus. So the total is the sum of these two numbers, which equals 200. Now, if I were to ask you, is there any deadweight loss, you should automatically know that there is no deadweight loss whatsoever with no tax. Again, when we have a tax, that's when we have a deadweight loss. At this point right here, we are at maximum efficiency. Supply equals demand. There's no deadweight loss, no inefficiency in this market. So that's how you calculate consumer, producer, and total surplus given no tax. So this is something that you should be able to do because, again, we're going to be doing this and then comparing it to our after-tax consumer surplus, producer surplus, total surplus, government revenue, as well as deadweight loss. All right, so now what we're going to do is implement a tax on the seller. Again, I mentioned in class a couple of weeks ago that on your exam as well as your final, you're only going to be tested on a tax on a seller, not a buyer. So if we know that you implement a tax on the seller, we've talked about this before, basically your cost of production has increased. Now it's much more expensive to produce your product, so we would essentially see a supply curve decrease or a leftward shift. So the first step you need to do, you have your tax. The tax is $5. We already know that. First step, this is also outlined on your worksheet that's available to you. You're going to go up from your origin as well as your equilibrium point by that same amount of units as your tax. So we'll start with the origin. Our origin right here is 0. We're going to go up to 5. Again, that's the size of our tax. That's how much we're going to go up. You're going to put a point right there. Now, our next point is our equilibrium. We're going to go up 5 units. So up 5 from 10 is going to be 15. So let's just say we put it right there. Now, all this does is this creates your new supply curve. This is an easier way to visualize what's going on with your supply and demand. So what you do, you just connect these 2 points afterwards. You can label it as your new supply curve. And that's all it's there for. It's to help visualize what's happening to your equilibrium. Now, our new equilibrium point is right here. So our equilibrium point is going to be at $12. Again, I gave you these numbers. These numbers will be given to you on the worksheet as well, as you'll see. But for now, just trust me that 12 is the number. Now, for our quantity, we're going to say it's 15. So from here, you should kind of start visualizing what's happening to consumer surplus, producer surplus, tax revenue, and deadweight loss. So from here, we've set up our new equilibrium point, and now we can calculate how much each individual pays for this, or pays of this tax. We have 2 people, buyers and sellers. So with the information that I've given you so far, you should be able to calculate who pays how much of the tax. All right, so now we're going to calculate the amount that the buyer pays and the amount the seller receives. So with a new tax, the buyer is going to pay a higher price. And we know buyers don't like paying higher prices because of the law of demand. Now, sellers receive less because the tax is implemented on them. They receive less because they're paying out of pocket. Now, this is shared between these 2 groups of people. It's not always 50-50. So we did an example in class where it was split 50-50. In this case, you'll see that it's not split 50-50. Okay, so at our original equilibrium at 10 and 20, so this was our original equilibrium, the buyers were paying $10. Now at our new equilibrium, the price that the buyers are paying is $12. So $12 is our new equilibrium price for buyers. So to calculate how much they pay the tax, you're just going to compare these 2 numbers, 12 and 10. So 12 minus 10 is 2. So the price that the buyers pay is 12. And they pay $2 of the tax. Now, if we know the buyer pays $2 of the tax, the other individuals in this transaction, so the sellers, they have to pay $3. It has to equal the total amount. So 2 plus 3 is going to be 5. Now, another way to check that is this is the price that the sellers or the buyers are paying. Now, at the same price, this is after we've already implemented the tax. You just go straight down, and our old supply curve, the importance of this shows us the price the sellers receive after paying the tax. So they've paid the tax already. A certain entity gets that tax, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But this is the price that the sellers receive. By them receiving this is how much they get in return for selling their product. Now, the buyer pays a higher price, which is not favorable. The sellers receive a lower price, which is not favorable. So at this point, we see it is $7. So originally, the sellers were receiving $10. Again, our original equilibrium was $10. Now, because of the tax that's been implemented, it creates this wedge. This is what we call the wedge. There's a gap right here. That is a wedge. Now, they were getting $10. Now, they're getting $7. So the difference between 10 and 7 is 3. The gap between our old equilibrium and the price the sellers receive now is 3. That's the difference. That's how much the tax the seller is paying. The buyer pays 2, the seller pays 3. So the price the buyers pay is $12 now, price sellers receive is 7. And all of this is comparing it to our old equilibrium, our original equilibrium. Now here, the buyer is worse off, the seller is worse off. Again, this point is lower, they receive a lower price. There's less incentive to go out and produce because they're receiving less. Again, law of supply. Higher price for consumers, this is bad, you consume less, your consumer surplus has decreased. Now we kind of created this rectangles, a couple of triangles, and here we can start calculating our consumer and producer surpluses. Alright, so now our goal is to calculate consumer surplus, producer surplus, total surplus, deadweight loss, and tax revenue. So we have a pre-tax and we have our after-tax. So consumer surplus, we're going to start by our new equilibrium price. Our new equilibrium price is 12. So it's the area beneath the demand curve, above the equilibrium price. So this shaded triangle is our new consumer surplus. So from here you should be able to do the math. It's the difference between 12 and 20. So it's 8 times the base, which is 15. So from this area right here is 15. And you're going to divide by 2. And your consumer surplus equals 60. So just from the get-go, you should know that because we have this tax, consumer surplus has decreased. Originally, when we did not have the tax, the consumer surplus was 100. Now it's 60, you see a decrease. Now we'll see what happens to producer surplus as well. So producer surplus is a price that they receive. So it's the area beneath the price that they receive, which is $7. So under the wedge, beneath that, but above the supply curve. So this area right here is your new producer surplus. So now we're going to calculate that. It's the gap between 0 and 7, which is 7 multiplied by 15 divided by 2. And you should get 52.5. All right, so we have these two areas, consumer surplus, producer surplus. Now in class, when I would ask this question, almost all students got this right. Consumer surplus, producer surplus. This area right here, this rectangle in the middle, is your government revenue. These two triangles are your deadweight loss. So again, you have all the tools that you need to calculate each one of these. Again, you can pause the video at any time to go ahead and do it just to check if your answers match up with mine. Okay, so before getting to total surplus, we're going to go to tax revenue. So tax revenue, the formula for this is the tax multiplied by the quantity that you produce after the tax. So this gap between 12 and 7 is 5. So again, our tax is $5. And we multiply that by the amount that we produce now, which is 15, which equals 75. So you've calculated consumer surplus, tax revenue, and producer surplus. Now from here, you can calculate total surplus. Now, a key distinction that a lot of students miss on exams is the formula for total surplus when we have a tax. So I'm just going to write the formula up here. Total surplus with a tax equals consumer surplus plus producer surplus plus the tax revenue. So what you would do is you would add 60, 52.5, and 75. Now your answer for your total surplus, so I'm kind of running out of space, is 187.5. So that's what the answer for that is. Now, you're going to calculate the deadweight loss. So in class, I had students that would just calculate the area of this overall triangle, which is not correct. Now in class, we were fortunate enough to have a 50-50 tax. In this case, it's not the same. So you're going to first calculate the area of this triangle here, and then this triangle here, and you're going to add them together. So the area of this top triangle right here, the gap between our old equilibrium and our new equilibrium is 2. So 2 times the gap between here, this is your base, which is 5, divided by 2 is 5. So this portion equals 5. Now this triangle down here, it's the gap between 10 and 7, which is 3. 3 times 5 divided by 2. And this should give you, give me a second, 7.5. All right, so now you're going to add these two areas together. So 5 plus 7.5, your deadweight loss with this tax is 12.5. Now, we've done all the calculations. Now it's time to talk about if this is good or not. So in terms of consumer and producer surplus, it's obviously not good compared to no tax because we don't have added benefit. So when we have a higher consumer surplus, this is good. When we have a higher producer surplus, this is good as well. Now our goal is to always maximize total surplus. That's always the goal. Now with the tax, what we do have is a deadweight loss. A deadweight loss is basically a loss to society. Not the buyer, not the seller, not the government gets this form of benefit. It's just lost. Now the people that benefit, consumers still benefit. You're still purchasing products. Producers benefit. They still are selling products. But the government, they benefit as well. So the tax revenue is going straight to the government. So in our case, our tax revenue was 75. So those 75 units are going to the government. They're going to use this and pump it back into our economy, whether it be public projects, government spending in some sense, healthcare, public housing, whatever it may be, fixing up roads. It's going to be used for good. This is why we see taxes as a good thing to have. Even though it creates inefficiencies, and we've talked about economists being against inefficiencies, it's still good that we have this. It's still good that we have this because it helps our economy. It helps fund these different projects. So that's how you calculate consumer producer surplus with taxes, without taxes. This is going to be a big part of your worksheet. Now, before we finish up, there's one more thing that we need to talk about is elasticities and taxes. So we kind of touched on this on our last lecture. Basically, depending on who pays majority of the tax, you can calculate if this product or if the demand is inelastic or elastic. So I want you to write this down somewhere in your notes or just memorize this. Basically, if the seller pays more of the tax, this means more money is coming out of the seller's pocket. This would mean that the product is elastic. Demand for this product is elastic. Again, elastic meaning that there's a lot of substitutes available to you. You can purchase different products in place of this. So consumers just have different alternatives they can go to. So if you increase the price or that the buyer has to pay, you're going to see consumers leave this market. Now, if the buyer paid more of the tax, this means that the buyer is willing to pay more of the tax, and this is inelastic. The demand for this product is inelastic, meaning there's not a lot of alternatives available. This is a necessity. Again, if the seller pays more, demand is elastic. If the buyer pays more, it's inelastic. Again, make sure you remember the definition of elasticity. It's your responsiveness to price change. All right, so that's all for this video. I hope this was helpful. I would love any feedback. Email me, leave a comment, whatever you need to do. So yeah, I will see you guys next time.